What's happening in Copenhagen this week somehow echoes what happened within to a different extent, what happened within multilateral trade negotiations to a certain extent, within the multilateral negotiations of the Doha trade round. We saw a little bit of the same dynamic with the developing countries pitched against the developed countries, somehow accusing the unfairness of the system and claiming that they should be exempt from certain obligations that are discussed. We've been discussing bilateral trade agreements a lot here at KEI and elsewhere over the past few months, and we've seen South and East Asia getting closer together than ever through these bilateral trade agreements in somehow similar fashion in this area of dealing with climate change. Of course, the Koreans, for example, have been talking a lot about being a role model and providing an example to others. They've been talking a lot about providing assistance to others, and I agree that the private sector definitely has to be involved because it simply has the critical mass to make a difference. It may make a difference that countries such as Korea are firmly committed to climate change. It may make a difference that they're firmly committed to ODAing climate change. However, the recipient countries may simply have different priorities. It may so happen that, for example, ODAing public health or other areas may simply rank much higher on their list of priorities. Individual countries, such as Korea, may they make a difference? Possibly. Bilateral cooperation may also make a difference in terms of persuading others to be more engaged. And for example, potential bilateral cooperation between Korea and the United States could happen not only at a policy level, but also at a technological level. For example, in terms of discussing collaboration on standardization, specifications, safety of, for example, plugs used for next generation vehicle batteries that are to be produced in Korea and installed on automobiles manufactured here.
Questions from the floor? Yes.
I'd just like to touch a little bit on the issue of monitoring. I understand from China's perspective what their reluctance might be because they not have monitoring involved. China's primary domestic and perhaps international right now is economic growth. If you take and agree to even loose restrictions in that monitoring, there'll be pressure to take that it might impede your economic growth. But I guess my question is that really the only imperative China's looking at? Because I think if you look at it from the flip side of the coin, ask the question, if you don't have monitoring, what happens going forward? As China grows, everybody knows China grows. I think without some kind of reliable data, so China look and say, look, if we kept our commitments, we're reducing our intensity, that they'll come under more pressure than they would if they were perhaps slipping under a monetary system because people will be suspicious of Chinese numbers. And I think if you look at the political pressure that builds for some things like currency in the U.S., imports in Europe to where they have actually had some more restrictions than they have in the U.S. on goods from China, then ultimately the cost of China could be larger without monitoring than with. And so the question becomes, is it in China's self-interest to actually have monitoring rather than not have it? So that way they can push and say, we've done what we said we would do, or we're really close and, you know, it's other people who need to step up.
Other yes.
Yeah, Dave Fitzgerald, retired government and now a private consultant. I was wondering if anyone on the panel or all of them would want to comment about nuclear power. I think in your presentations you talked about, particularly in Japan, South Korea, China, greater attention to that because of the need to, or their obsession to get away from their oil dependency, which is extreme. I don't see the same view in the United States about nuclear power. The embrace of that type of technology for partnerships with other countries, particularly these three countries who have this perhaps much higher priority for that. Is this an area of tension? How does this whole nuclear question get into the other area of non-proliferation problems and controls, that type of thing, and the controlled reprocessing, I guess? I'll take
a bite at that one a little bit. I think you characterized the situation well. There's Korea clearly has embraced nuclear power as the way forward, and you don't hear much debate. China has embraced it now very aggressively, using buying international technology to do it. So they're keeping a lot of the nuclear business alive. The U.S. is going through its usual kind of finding its difficult way forward. So, we had a very negative image from economics, from safety, of waste, of what nuclear power was all about. And there's a debate going on trying to move forward to actually get some plants built. And that combination of economics and concern about safety makes it somewhat more difficult in the U.S. to get this industry going. Especially in Korea and China, you've got a strong government push in terms of financing. In the U.S., we've got some loan guarantees on the table, but you still have to have your projects stand on the commercial viability. Our utilities tend to be relatively commercially or economically weaker than, say, Japanese utilities. So taking on a nuclear power plant is a big risk for them. So the utility industry itself is having trouble. And then we have this little problem of credit being available, which is kind of slow things. I think the U.S. is getting there. There's 24 or 5 applications before the NRC that's moving forward. The safety issue seems to be less of a drumbeat as now the trade-off with climate becomes more clear. So I think you're seeing that movement towards having a viable nuclear industry. Is just taking us longer, as it often does. The question about waste and reprocessing is an interesting one. We did a session on 4 sessions on nuclear power. We did one especially on waste, and I came away from that thinking, why would you want to go into reprocessing? It is a mantra for many people that we have to have reprocessing, but uranium supplies are not a problem, and we now have advanced the dry cast storage capabilities to buy us about 100 years of ability to store nuclear waste. So reprocessing in some ways is not necessarily something we have to jump into. Other countries have different perspectives, so we'll have to see. But that is still lingering as an issue. And then more broadly, non-proliferation is a very big question. How do you set a regime that will control materials and knowledge, especially as this kind of industry starts going more global all the time? And I think that's, to our mind, where you really have to now start paying attention, is we need some kind of different mechanism than, that, I don't know if I want to say, because I'm not an non-proliferation person, I don't want to say we want to replace the NPT, but we need to find a way to augment it such that it becomes stronger and provide incentives not to go towards weapons.
The only thing I would add to that is we've done some work in this area as well. We've just held a major dialogue with a lot of experts on where is electric power coming from in the United States between now and 2050. The analysis that comes out of all the leading experts from government, private industry, et cetera, is you simply cannot even get close to any of the goals that we have, whether you take the 17% for 2020 or you go with the Herculean numbers of 80% by 2050 without nuclear power. You're going to have nuclear power. So the problem is us solving some of the financial problems and some of the other problems. But the world cannot get to where it's going without nuclear power. Many other countries have already accepted that in a big way. And there is U.S. cooperation with China that is immense. Basically, Westinghouse, which isn't all U.S. anymore, partly is given over all their designs. The Chinese are now building those plants. They're building the plants. The shortest ones we have put up in 5.5 years. So we take 10 to 12 years. They do it in 5.5, and they're doing it. We're not talking about it. They're doing it right now. The Indians and the U.S. are in active negotiations on the nuclear power plants, and there's just some agreements that have to be finalized on the reprocessing question. But those are underway, and I would expect that India will move ahead as well with massive nuclear. They may solve some of the proliferation problem by going into thorium. So there are techniques, and so the U.S. The U.S. is going to have have a breakthrough on nuclear power, the politicians are going to have to agree to that. And I think the administration is strongly supportive of loan guarantees because that so helps solve some of the financial problems. But it's going to come, and in a few years, China will have more nuclear power than we do. And it's hard to believe. But we don't want to lose a whole industrial base. We're going to have to do